Event Horizon wasn't built to be ordinary. It was the shining in space, a cathedral of Gothic horror drifting through the void. Behind the screams and shadows lay a production cursed from the start, impossible deadlines, lost footage, and a vision too terrifying for 1997 audiences. What Paramount buried as a failure became something else entirely, a cult phenomenon that refused to die. From costume torture chambers to deleted scenes rotting in salt mines, these are the secrets hidden inside the ship that opened a gateway to hell. Paul W.S. Anderson envisioned years to craft his haunted house in space, building dread layer by carefully designed layer. Then James Cameron's Titanic changed everything. Paramount delayed Cameron's epic from July to December 1997, leaving a gaping hole in their summer slate. Their solution was brutal. Shove Event Horizon into the vacant slot and demand Anderson deliver a $60 million spectacle in just 10 months from greenlight to final cut. Sets were hammered together in weeks while actors rehearsed as sawdust still floated through the air. Anderson's longer, more terrifying vision was sacrificed before it could breathe. If rushed production wasn't punishment enough, wait until you hear what test audiences couldn't stomach. Anderson's first cut wasn't just longer, it was unbearable. Running 130 minutes, it shocked even hardened horror fans during test screenings. Audiences fainted. Studio executives fled mid-screening. One viewer reportedly vomited in the aisle. What broke them were the hell sequences filmed during stolen weekends with skeleton crews, grotesque orgies, visceral mutilations, and visions of damnation so vivid they barely looked staged. Paramount panicked and slashed the film to 96 minutes, ripping out entire sequences and softening the violence throughout. Fans begged for the director's cut for decades, but the footage had vanished. Some reels were stored in a Transylvanian salt mine where they rotted into unusability. Others survived only as damaged VHS workprint tapes. The nightmare version became urban legend, the most terrifying film Hollywood never allowed to exist. The ultimate irony. A story about visions of hell lost its own to time. The physical suffering didn't end with the cuts, though. The horrors weren't confined to the script. The costumes were torture chambers in disguise. Each spacesuit weighed over 65 pounds with rigid backpacks that made sitting physically impossible. Actors couldn't stand for extended periods either, so crews bolted poles into the floor for them to lean against like mannequins between takes. Moving through narrow sets became punishment, every step a fight against gravity and physical limits. Shooting single scenes required Herculean stamina just to remain upright. In a film obsessed with suffering, the irony was brutal. The first victims weren't swallowed by black holes, but crushed by their own costumes. The suffering extended beyond wardrobe to the very architecture surrounding them. The Event Horizon wasn't designed like a starship. It was built like a cathedral. Production designer Joseph Bennett turned to Gothic architecture, modeling corridors after Notre Dame's haunting grandeur. Cross-shaped doorways, vaulted arches, and stained glass patterns rendered in steel created a vessel that felt more haunted than engineered. Every surface carried symbolic weight. The gravity drive core became a spinning altar of spikes echoing medieval torture devices, while shadows fell across walls like church pews, as if the crew had stumbled into a place of worship. Only the god here wasn't salvation, it was suffering incarnate. This gave the ship presence no CGI could replicate. The Horizon didn't just house evil, it looked architecturally designed for it, floating through space as a church of pain drifting toward damnation. The vessel's design was perfect, but the faces commanding it nearly belonged to completely different Hollywood legends. Casting Event Horizon was like glimpsing a parallel universe where different Hollywood legends commanded the bridge. For Captain Miller, Paramount courted Bruce Willis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Tommy Lee Jones. His controlled descent into madness gave the film its most chilling edge, echoing his haunted turn as Damien in the final conflict. Neil transformed Weir beyond villain into the film's beating heart of dread. The casting worked perfectly, but Neil's transformation into madness came at a personal cost. For Sam Neill, playing Dr. Weir wasn't just another role, it was a plunge into something that shook him fundamentally. The makeup team covered his face in grotesque prosthetics, skin torn open, eyes sewn shut, veins running like black rivers beneath the surface. Hours in the makeup chair left him staring at reflections that barely resembled human. Neil later admitted it unsettled him in ways dinosaurs never had. In a film filled with shadows and screams, Neil brought the scariest truth. Evil isn't external, it's in the mirror waiting. His co-star experienced different psychological tolls from the production. Lawrence Fishburne was no stranger to intense productions, but Event Horizon's sets rattled him unexpectedly. The steel corridors were narrow and echoing, lit with blood-red glows and streaked with screams from sound design teams testing playback loops. Walking those halls between takes felt less like acting and more like trespassing through nightmares. Fishburne later confessed that some nights he struggled sleeping after shooting Wrapped. For a movie about a vessel driving people insane, the most chilling aspect may be that it nearly accomplished the same with its captain. Fishburne didn't just perform in Event Horizon, he carried its haunted steel in his bones. This oppressive atmosphere was entirely intentional from Anderson's foundational vision. When Paul W.S. Anderson pitched Event Horizon, he didn't compare it to Alien or Star Trek. He imagined a spaceship not as exploration vessel, but as haunted hotel drifting through the void. Endless corridors were shot like hallways designed to disorient, while Gothic arches and cathedral lighting made the ship feel less like technology and more like a shrine to fear incarnate. Characters weren't battling monsters, they were stalked by the ship itself, each corner echoing with whispers and shadows. Anderson's promise of the shining in space became the film's guiding principle. This wasn't science fiction built for wonder or optimism. It was engineered for claustrophobia, paranoia, and the terror that real horror wasn't lurking in space. It was already inside the walls. Ironically, Kubrick himself was filming nearby during production. But Anderson's horror vision underwent radical transformation from its original concept. The earliest Event Horizon drafts didn't feature hell at all. They leaned on familiar sci-fi terror with slimy aliens, tentacles, and body-snatching creatures straight from Alien's playbook. It was horror from the outside invading in. But Paul W.S. Anderson hated it viscerally. He didn't want another derivative monster movie. He wanted damnation itself. Anderson rewrote the script entirely, stripping out aliens and replacing them with hallucinations, mutilated crew members, and visions dredged from characters' darkest fears and guilts. Speaking of Paramount's expectations, they had very different ideas about what they'd purchased. When Paramount bought the script, they didn't envision hellish hallucinations or gothic nightmares. They imagined something sleek and marketable, Star Trek with an edge, a sci-fi adventure they could sell with optimism and visual spectacle. What Anderson delivered was closer to Hellraiser in orbit: blood-streaked walls, mutilated bodies, and a spaceship designed like a cathedral of suffering. Executives panicked. The disconnect was brutal and immediate. That fundamental mismatch haunted Event Horizon from day one. Audiences who showed up expecting exploration found themselves trapped in nightmares. exactly the ones Paramount never wanted to finance. The studio's crisis deepened when they saw the final production numbers. Seeking savings, Paramount made a calculated gamble. Instead of hiring Industrial Light and Magic, the gold standard of visual effects, they spread work across smaller UK houses like Cinesight and Mass Illusion. These teams were hungry, creative, and significantly cheaper, but they also had less time, reduced manpower, and almost zero margin for error. Somehow, against crushing odds, they delivered visuals that still hold up decades later. Twisting drive shafts, collapsing corridors, and a ship that looked like a cathedral pulled inside out. For 1997, it was shockingly ambitious work. And just next door at Pinewood Studios, history was colliding in the strangest way. In another, Stanley Kubrick was quietly filming Eyes Wide Shut. Two visions of torment, one cosmic, one domestic, side by side. Paul W.S. Anderson could have played it safe and profitable. Mortal Kombat had just hit big, proving he could turn arcade chaos into box office gold. The sequel was waiting with a guaranteed paycheck. Hollywood even dangled X-Men in front of him, the kind of superhero franchise most young directors would sacrifice anything to helm. But Anderson walked away from all of it. He wasn't chasing hits or building a blockbuster career. He wanted something darker, more personal. When Event Horizon crossed his desk, he saw the chance to craft a sci-fi horror epic, not popcorn entertainment, but nightmares that would disturb audiences. He called it The Shining in Space and believed it could redefine him as a filmmaker. The gamble nearly cost him everything. The film bombed theatrically and critics eviscerated it. But his soundtrack choices would prove equally bold and unconventional. Anderson knew sound would deliver half the terror. He wanted something jagged and industrial, music that felt like machinery grinding against bone. Paramount balked immediately. Too niche, too strange for mainstream audiences. They demanded orchestral grandeur echoing Hollywood tradition. The compromise seemed unlikely. Michael Kamen, legendary composer behind Die Hard and Lethal Weapon, stepped in. But instead of pushing Orbital aside completely, Kamen pulled them into the collaboration. He fused their electronic chaos with his own sweeping orchestral dread, creating a score unlike anything audiences had heard. Pounding drums, strings that wailed like screams, and electronic beats transformed hell into a sonic assault. On screen, it didn't feel like Star Trek. It felt like the gates of damnation had opened in space, pulsing with rhythm. Even small visual details carried ominous meanings. The horror wasn't just blood and shadows, it was stitched into the smallest production details. Look closely at crew uniforms and you'll see a future rewritten by geopolitical shifts. The United States flag no longer had 50 stars but 55, hinting at 5 new states quietly added to the Union. Australia's flag dropped the Union Jack entirely, replacing it with an Aboriginal-inspired design symbolizing a complete break from colonial history. And the British insignia wasn't just the Union Jack either. It showed a European Union flag with 27 stars, decades before Brexit would reshape the real world. Blink and you'd miss them, but the message was clear. Humanity's next frontier wouldn't just be space, but history itself, redrawn by forces unseen. When Event Horizon landed in August 1997, the knives came out fast and sharp. Roger Ebert gave it a single star, calling it tasteless and incoherent. Other reviewers dismissed it as nihilistic, overwrought, even boring, the harshest word for a film designed to terrify. They couldn't believe Paramount had poured $60 million into something so relentlessly grim. For many, it wasn't just a bad movie, it was a disaster, proof that Paul W.S. Anderson had overreached after his early Mortal Kombat success. Audiences didn't protest the verdict. They simply stayed home in droves. The box office numbers would prove even more devastating. With a $60 million budget and prime summer release slot, Paramount expected Event Horizon to soar commercially. Instead, it barely scraped $42 million worldwide, numbers that were absolutely brutal. Not just a stumble, but a freefall collapse. By the time accounting finished, the film had imploded under its own weight, branded a financial black hole. One ship doomed on screen, but triumphant financially. The other lost in theaters before audiences even climbed aboard. Paramount moved on quickly, shelving sequel talk and burying the film under new projects. But one Hollywood veteran saw something others didn't. Paul W.S. Anderson walked away from Event Horizon bruised and doubting everything. Critics had eviscerated it. The box office cratered spectacularly, and Paramount buried the film like toxic waste. For a young director riding high off Mortal Kombat's success, it felt like career suicide. Then came an unlikely voice of comfort: Kurt Russell. He told Anderson, "At the time, it sounded like simple kindness, a veteran calming a rookie." But Russell was absolutely right, and vindication was already beginning in an unexpected place. Theatrical audiences may have shrugged, but on VHS, the entire story flipped dramatically. Event Horizon slipped into video stores, stacked on shelves alongside other horror offerings, waiting for night owls and genre junkies to take a chance. The jagged edits and gothic mood, which felt chaotic on big screens, became unsettlingly intimate on the glow of tube TVs. Slowly but steadily, the film found audiences who didn't see trash. They saw nightmare fuel. By the early 2000s, Event Horizon wasn't a forgotten flop anymore. It was a rite of passage. Surprisingly, the film even caught attention from unexpected circles. Most critics dismissed Event Horizon as trashy horror without substance, but in physics circles, it sparked genuine intellectual debate. The film's gravity drive, a device that bent reality by punching holes through space-time, wasn't just movie magic or pseudoscience. It echoed actual wormhole theory that physicists actively researched. While audiences covered their eyes at gore, scientists leaned forward, intrigued by the theoretical physics. The black hole may have swallowed Paramount's box office hopes completely, but it left behind something rarer and more valuable: respect from the very people who study the cosmos professionally. That respect eventually translated into Hollywood reconsidering the property. For years, Event Horizon seemed dead in the water, a costly flop with no commercial future whatsoever. But its afterlife as a cult classic kept growing louder and more insistent. Horror fans dissected its imagery frame by frame, traded bootleg copies of deleted scenes like sacred texts, and demanded more. Eventually, Hollywood listened. For a brief moment, it looked like Event Horizon would finally claim the franchise life Paramount once denied it. But just like the lost director's cut, the dream slipped away into development hell. The project stalled indefinitely and vanished without trace. Still, the very fact it was seriously considered proved something the 1997 studio never believed. Event Horizon wasn't a failure. It was a seed planted in darkness, waiting. Through VHS tapes, midnight screenings, and gaming DNA, it metastasized into something Paramount never imagined, a cult phenomenon that still haunts new generations. What critics buried as trash became a rite of passage whispered about in the dark. The nightmare didn't end in 1997. It's still pulling viewers across the Event Horizon. Keep watching Golden Frame for more deep dives into cinema's most fascinating stories.